It was the middle of May 1945, and the mountains of snow that practically paralyzed our region every year had almost completely melted. The temperature was still very cold, and we were bundled up but were allowed to play outside on this beautiful sunny day. The adults busied themselves with getting farm equipment ready or cleaning out animal barns and hay barns. Hay was running low, so on a rare warm day, we could let the animals out to graze. That was one of my favorite times. The older kids were charged with watching over the animals, and of course, we all tagged along just for fun. There were very few boundary lines between properties, and it did not matter much if our animals strayed into our neighbor's property or if theirs crossed into ours. All of us kept an eye on the animals with the help of our German Shepherd Max so that they wouldn't wander off. We built bonfires and roasted big potatoes in the fire. When they were done, the skin was burned to a crisp, but the inside was soft and tasted so good. I have to admit, every once in a while, the excitement over those delicious potatoes made us forget the reasons we were there. Eventually, one of us noticed that we were short a cow or two or a sheep. Then it was time to drop everything and start looking for them in the forest. Usually, we found them deeper in the woods where the grass grew tastier and was more protected. They were never hard to find, and they were always easy to catch because they were so used to being handled by us from the day they were born. One day, as we came home with our herd, singing from the top of our lungs, Dad was waiting for us and called everyone into the house when where all the adults were already assembled. Everyone looked very serious. Dad had just listened to the radio in the bomb shelter and heard the announcement that the war was over and Germany was soundly defeated. I was only 5.5 years old, but understood at least some of the seriousness of this development. The teenagers and adults all started crying and clung to each other. The younger crowd just watched completely confused, me included. After everyone settled down a bit, they all seemed to talk at the same time. I kept looking at my parents and the other adults and caught the fear in their voices as they wondered who was going to occupy us. We all remembered the brutality of the Russians, and we had no idea what to expect from the rest of the Allied forces. Looking at the frightened faces of my parents shook my world. After a lengthy discussion among the adults, it was decided that Dad would climb on the roof to put up a white sheet as a flag of surrender. No matter who came in first to occupy us, we wanted them to know that we meant no harm to them and just wanted peace. Of course, the news of Germany's surrender had not yet reached all the German soldiers, and they were still firing from the surrounding forests. Our farmhouse was situated on the main highway between Germany in the west and Czechoslovakia in the east. The white flag on the roof could be seen for miles around. When Dad came down off the roof, he informed everyone that he thought he saw American troops in the distance. We knew absolutely nothing about the Americans, though we are relieved it was not Russian troops marching toward us, but we did not know if the same rough treatment awaited us from the Americans. Everyone waited anxiously as the Americans came closer and closer. Soon we could hear the boots hitting the pavement. Our little group consisted of our family of four and at least six refugee families. No one talked as we saw the American soldiers marching towards our house, but everyone held their breath as they approached. When I looked up at my parents and saw the terror in their faces, I could hardly breathe. My heart was pounding so fast it almost hurt. The women and children were crying and everyone looked petrified. There are no words to describe the mixed feelings of absolute terror, helplessness, and fear of the unknown. The very first soldier coming toward us was a black man with a rifle and a bayonet attached to it. I looked at my dad, who in my eyes was the bravest man I knew, and he and the other adults looked like they were frozen in place. The first shock for all of us was seeing a black man standing before us with a rifle pointed at us. None of us had ever even seen a black man. His skin was very dark, and I remember thinking that we were all going to die when he pushed us up against the wall, his hands shaking like a leaf. His skin was so dark and his eyes were big as saucers. He looked as petrified as we all were. The young officer in charge told us in a very broken German that we had to leave the main house and move into the small cottage in the back where my grandparents lived before they passed away. The main house was becoming the temporary American headquarters for this region. We watched the young soldiers filing in, looking as scared as we were, many of them wounded and all of them exhausted. Since the news of the end of the war had not been heard by everyone, there were still shots coming from the surrounding forest, which did nothing to calm ours or the soldiers' nerves. The mistrust on both sides was obvious. Dad decided it will be better for everyone if we complied with their demands and leave the main house. The language barrier was a big obstacle. None of us wanted to get shot as the soldiers kept their weapons aimed at us, ready to fire. The commander kept trying to reach someone in their command post to no avail. There was total chaos all around us as we packed a few essentials to move into the cottage. Keep in mind, there were several refugee families and our family trying to fit into a one-bedroom cottage somehow. It did not take knowledge of the English language to realize that communication with their command center or even other units was impossible. Their field kitchen and medics had not caught up with them yet. They therefore had little food, and even though there was a medic among them, he had no supplies. He tried his best to care for the wounded, but had very little success. The commander in charge handed out packages of crackers and water. Mother, being a nurse, took notice. The eternal big pot of soup on the stove soon disappeared. While we were all filed out the door, Mother kept looking over at those young men with blistered and bloody feet. Everyone talked in hushed voices, and we could see the fear on their faces too. The adults kept trying to assure us little ones that all would be all right, but they were not very convincing. As we yeah, as we tried to find a place for everyone in the little cottage, some semblance of order fell into place and everyone relaxed a bit until Mother announced she was going down to the main house to tend to those wounded soldiers. Suddenly, our short lived peace was shattered when all the adults talked at once, trying to dissuade her from putting herself and the rest of us in danger. Dad tried to tell her all her good intentions were worthless because the Americans could not understand her. She silently just kept on shredding bed sheets for bandages. As she headed for the door with her black bag packed with salves and ointments, I begged her to let me go with her because I thought I could help somehow. Maybe she thought the same thing because, to my surprise, she let me tag along. As we approached the front door, I was hanging onto her skirt for dear life. The same black man put his rifle on Mother's chest, trying to keep her from entering. He was shaking so bad, Mother feared his gun would go off accidentally. She just looked at him, pushed the rifle away, and entered the house. I looked back at the black guard, who looked more confused and scared now. He yelled for his supervisor, And both of them followed Mother and myself into the kitchen, demanding all the time to stop. She paid no attention to them. I was not surprised by Mother's action, but in awe of her bravery. As we entered the large kitchen, everyone was already on full alert by the excited voices coming from the hallway. All of them now had their weapons pointed at us. They all talked at the same time, but we did not understand a word, of course. Mother simply opened her bag and showed them the content. It was then they withdrew their weapons, but watched her every move. She acted totally unconcerned and heated a big pot of water, started washing their feet and disinfecting their wounds and wrapping them in the shredded bed sheets. As soon as they realized she came to help them, they relaxed a bit, but still kept a close eye on her. One big black man came over to me and handed me a little brown bar and a green pack of something. I had no idea what to do with either of them. I was more interested in him than the gifts, wondering why his skin was so dark. What I really wanted to do is to touch his face to see if the dog collar came off, but I didn't have the nerve yet. He put me on his lap, broke off a little piece from that brown bar and ate it, all the while rubbing his stomach to try to show me how good it was. I watched him for a while, trying to decide if I could trust him. I was desperately trying to get Mother's attention to find out what she thought I should do, but she was so busy patching up the wounded soldiers that she paid no attention to me. When I looked up, there were several black and white soldiers standing around me and talking, taking a bite from the little brown bar while I was still holding on to mine. I had already decided that this brown bar caused their skin to turn dark. Cautiously, none of the white, Curiously, none of the white soldiers' skin turned brown, though. But I had no time to analyze this further and finally took a bite from the brown bar in my hand. All the soldiers clapped and encouraged me to eat more. To my utter amazement, this was undoubtedly the best food I ever ate. At this point, I would have happily traded my sister for more of this wonderful brown stuff. Of course, I knew my parents would not go along with that idea, so I just stuck close to the soldiers and they kept sharing with me. I was no longer afraid of them I was no longer afraid of them and was allowed to go down to the main house by myself. A few days later, their supplies caught up with them, and with that, more Hershey bars. All the soldiers treated us with respect, but most of them adored the kids. The black man who got me hooked on chocolate became my special friend. One day, noticing my curiosity, he took my hand and rubbed it all over his face. I realized then his dark skin color did not rub off. By then I no longer cared and trusted him completely. Whenever he saw me, he picked me up and carried me around. We did not understand each other's language, but we had some of the best conversations and really just enjoyed each other's company. He had a beautiful, deep voice and sang what sounded like very sad songs. I later learned they were Negro spirituals. I can still see his beautiful smile and pearly white teeth. Eventually, I found out what was in the green pack my friend gave me earlier. Convincing me to chew that good stuff without swallowing it was another story. Since hunger was such a big part of my life, it seemed impossible that something existed that I could just enjoy without actually having to swallow it to fill my stomach. My new friend had a lot of patience with me. He kept rubbing his throat and shaking his head no. Eventually, I got the message that I should not swallow this sweet, chewy stuff that he called gum. I learned to enjoy chewing gum and had a piece in my mouth almost all the time. I soon found out the hard way that spitting it out and leaving it for my parents to step in it was not a good idea, and I learned to deposit it in the trash. Between a Hershey, the Hershey bars and chewing gum, my life was just wonderful. I was happy the Americans came. In time, even the adults relaxed around them and no one was afraid of them any longer. More important, the soldiers learned to trust us too. In fact, all the kids went down to the main house on a daily basis because there were always more sweets waiting for us. Most of the soldiers taught us how to play games. Some even prayed with us. After a few weeks, the soldiers grew tired of their field rations, dehydrated eggs, and powdered milk. We were hungry ourselves and did not have food to share with them. Even though we lived on a farm and had lots of animals, we were not allowed to eat any eggs, drink in our milk, or kill any chickens or cows. Every Monday, Czech police came around to collect the eggs for the week and the butter. We churned and counted all the livestock. One of the American soldiers was a butcher. And all and they all had decided to kill a cow. My parents were petrified of the consequences if the head count came up short the next week. Dad tried to explain the best he could, but it was no use. Their hunger for a good barbecue won the battle. The language barrier was a huge problem, but the soldier with a limited knowledge of German finally convinced Dad not to worry, that they would handle the Czech police. Well, a cow was killed. The men dug a big pit in the backyard, covered it with a makeshift crate, and roasted the whole cow. The wonderful aroma drove the whole town to come and investigate. The soldiers kindly shared with all of us. We all had some meat for the first time in months. It tasted so good we forgot all about the head count. When the police came around the following Monday, Dad told them that one cow died. We could see the anger in their faces as they spoke to Dad in a very loud and harsh voice. The Americans managed to get across to Dad exactly what to say by several of them talking to him with their hands and drawing pictures. With a sad face, Dad explained to the inspectors that the cow was buried in the big manure pile behind the barn. One of the soldiers showed them where they needed to dig. The head and hide of the cow were actually buried there. The food police, as we called them, looked at each other and none of them wanted to attempt to dig in that dirty, smelly pile. By the time I had decided, all these soldiers were not only my friends, they were my angels. After all, every time I brought them fresh eggs, they gave me more Hershey bars. I got up every morning before Mother collected eggs and gathered them to give them to the soldiers in return for sweets. I was smart enough to leave a few behind. Mother could not understand why the hen just about stopped laying. The soldiers loved the fresh eggs so much they were happy to keep my secret. Of course, I had underestimated Mother. She soon figured out what I was up to and caught me in the act one morning. This time I earned the beating I got and never pulled this stunt again. As a 5-year-old, I did not realize the danger I put my parents in when the egg count fell short. For that, for what seemed like an eternity for me, I was forbidden to go near the main house. Then Mother simmered down and I was allowed to visit my new friends again. They still gave me sweets and played with me, and even though I had no fresh eggs for them, they understood the situation we were in. No, of course, not all American soldiers were friendly and kind towards us. Some looked at us with such hatred in their eyes, we soon learned to stay away from them. In fact, when Dad checked his secret hiding place in the bomb shelter, he realized that all the jewelry, coin collection, his guns, and several family heirlooms had been stolen. It was strictly forbidden for American soldiers to rob and steal, and any theft was to be reported to the commander in charge. Dad did report the theft, but nothing ever came of it. We realized we were at their mercy and knew it was best to just let it go.